I don't have any slides. I worked for Microsoft for 17 years and I've been PowerPointed to death. In fact, I'm so old I joined Microsoft before they even bought PowerPoint, you know that. Oh well, that's all right. So my choice for a post-mortem is to talk about HTML5. It's a technology and a platform, not a product and not a game. But I think I can hopefully make it relevant for all of you. I'm trying to do it really quite quickly. To kind of put it in perspective though, why I'm talking about it, I thought well, first to give you a really potted history of yo-yo games to kind of put it in perspective. Yo-yo we started way back in 2006 with this great idea which was, at the time we called Ministry of Games. We discovered a bunch of Germans had taken the URL so we couldn't call ourselves that. But it was to create a platform that was an incubator for new talent in the industry. It's kind of funny to see people here tonight, and Zoe and Alex, and I spoke to you guys earlier. You were definitely still at school, but in the early stages of your schooling when we started on the Yo-Yo Games concept. And right at that time as well, late 2006, early 2007, there was a thing that was breaking, which, believe it or not, was breaking, which was YouTube. And in fact, it was so early when somebody told me, you better go and see YouTube, Sandy. I thought it was a movie. And then I discovered it was a website, so I typed in YouTube. And apparently the guys who owned the YouTube URL tried to sue YouTube because they were getting far too many hits. Oh well. But we were like the YouTube games. We never called ourselves that, but the idea was to be a talent incubator where we gave people the gaming equivalent of a video camera and people could create content. It was actually very successful. We had about, even today, we almost closed off that part of the website. We've kind of left it open for sentimental sakes, and people still upload games to that part for review and rating and playing by their peers. I think today, there are about 150,000 games have been uploaded there. Admittedly, most of them aren't very good. But the idea was to take the cream of those and to publish them. So our goal was not just to give people a creative outlet, but to take their content and use our kind of industry expertise we thought we had and help people get those games published. So in a way, we would bring this whole talent thing through a bubble or a pyramid and take the best games and publish them. I did this amazing swoop, which was back in late 2006. I heard about this thing called Game Maker. And Game Maker had been around since 1999. And the guy who had created it, Professor Mark Overmars of University of Utrecht in the Netherlands, Mark had sold it. He hadn't signed the contract, but he'd sold it to Atari. And you know, I've always been a sales guy in most of my life, and I managed somehow to pull off the sales coup of my life. I told him he didn't need $2 million, but he needed some shares in Yo-Yo Games instead. And so we still haven't paid him the $2 million either. He's really enthusiastic too. And so we persuaded him to pass it over. Of course, there was a little bit of a catch. I found out it was written in Delphi, and I thought, I'll get loads of Delphi programmers, it won't be a problem. But I learned there's not a lot of you out there. And in fact, actually, an interesting little factoid going off to the side here, total tangent. I was reading up on C# last night and discovered the guy who invented was the father of C# at Microsoft, was the guy who invented Delphi for Borland out of Turbo Pascal. I'm not sure if that's good or bad. Anyway, what we did discover that our vision of publishing content changed dramatically. In 2007, Apple came to us, said, you've got all these games, we're going to launch this phone, and we really think we could take some of your games and put them on this phone. And I went, phone, you must be joking. Send them packing. One of the great decisions of my life. But anyway, the reason we couldn't do it was the tech was written in Delphi and we couldn't port it to other platforms. We overcame that eventually. I met some amazing people, which is why the company's based here in Dundee, particularly a guy called Mike Daly and Russell Kay, who were closely associated with really the genesis of the games industry in Dundee way back in the late 1980s with a game called Lemmings. And in fact, Davy Jones was mentioned earlier, doesn't deserve 2 accolades in one evening, and he's not going to get one. But anyway, and Dave was clearly the business and games creative genius behind all of that as well. But anyway, I got the other 2. And so we did eventually publish games. In fact, we published games quite successfully. What we did was we took this Game Maker technology, made it work across these new platforms, particularly smartphones like Android and iOS. And we managed to take these games that had been written mainly by bedroom coders. It's really lovely to hear the guys talking about Dare and Something Tonight that where Game Maker is starting to be really featured, but it has been for years, been used in that kind of classroom and bedroom environment. We took some of those games and we published them, and developed and published them on multiple platforms. And it was an amazing experience. And part of the learning, even before I get to HTML5, that I want to kind of share with you, is that publishing games isn't an iterative experience. We had hits with things like Mr. Karoshi and They Need to Be Fed. We had They Need to Be Fed was a launch title when Google went from Android Market to Google Play. We didn't even know they were going to do it. And I think in that case, we certainly outsold Jan's game. We got something like 30,000 sales in one day there, and then admittedly we followed his curve and got about 1,000 the next. But we had some hits. Mr. Karoshi was Android Game of the Year for Pocket Gamer. What we realised very quickly is that the bedroom coders didn't do all of those kind of core skills very well. So they may be a good programmer, but they were rubbish at art, rubbish at game design, and rubbish at doing music. Or they'd be great at music. Nobody had more than 2 of those 4 core skill sets. So we ended up doing an awful lot of work. Admittedly, the tech allowed us to do it fairly cheaply. Anyway, we published a bunch of games, we got quite well known, and we decided, well actually we started to get recognised as a technology company as well as a games company. And there was a bunch of guys called Zynga who gave us a call from a very mistaken conversation we had with someone at GDC Europe, believe it or not, and said, we hear you guys have got an HTML5 games platform, we want to buy your company. I said, well, we don't have the platform yet, but you could invest in us. Send the investments, take as many lines of a contract as buying your company, now fuck off. I'm sorry, they didn't want to buy us. But it got us thinking, hell, this HTML5 thing is pretty hot. If only we had HTML5, they would be buying us, and maybe other people would be interested too. So we'd often spoken about our love of browser games and of web games and getting on the desktop in a more easily distributable way than being a Windows game. So actually the technology of Game Maker made it very easy to create from our own scripting language, basically to translate that into JavaScript. It's something we talked about a long time doing. And it took us 4 months to go from a concept to an actual product called Game Maker HTML5. We got to GDC Europe in 2000, and I've got to get the year right, it was August 2011. We were so excited because we thought everybody wants HTML5. We turned up, we had a little stand. For the first time in the company's history, we were exhibiting. We stood there, loads of people came to see us, and they all went, wow, this is brilliant, can't you just do this for iOS and Android? I don't know, shit, we got that back in the office. So long story short, we went off and created something called Game Maker Studio, which we took all the bits we already had and repackaged it. So why did we end up with this Game Maker HTML5 thing, which I think it's still a bunch of technologies that people talk a lot about in HTML5. So I'm actually getting into the core theme of my talk now, which is only going to take another 5 minutes. So what's bad about HTML5 that disappointed us so much? Well, I think the first thing is you've got to get into sight that HTML5 is not a platform. HTML5 is a bunch of recognized technologies that have been around for a long time. JavaScript, Canvas, the CSS, they're all bits and pieces that people know. It's also designed by a worldwide committee that take 10 years to come up with new standards. And it's done for their sake. So is this a consumer-oriented, great thing for people who want to use their browser for new things? Yeah, in some ways, but designed by and created for all the wrong reasons. Actually, it is a pretty cool set of technologies. It does an awful lot of things. But keep that in mind. HTML5 is not a product. HTML5 is not a platform, it's a set of technologies. The second part that's bad about it is the inconsistent implementation of HTML5. There's a broad line that you can draw between, and I'll say desktop rather than browser, but between desktop and between mobile. Mobile seems to be, I don't know, you say what you like about it, almost a conspiracy theory at times. Apple do not want HTML5 working well on their devices in the browser, because that just circumvents the App Store. And I say this to so many people, that if you think you're going to do an HTML5 game, which long term, as a technology, is going to allow you round the App Store, forget it. Because Apple don't want to break what is for Apple the core value proposition, which is the overall consumer experience of their devices. They're a hardware company, and they want to sell lots of great hardware. The software, the UX, the UI, all of that is just part of it, but what they don't want you to do is decide what's good for you that they haven't preempted in the first place. So HTML5 is never going to get round paying 30% to Apple or 30% to Google or whoever. I think the industry's moved way on from then anyway, and we find a 30% tax on what we do is not unreasonable for a great ecosystem behind it anyway. But you should keep that in mind. The second thing is, even on desktop, HTML5 is wildly different implementations. If anybody here has used IE10 or even IE11, you'll find that Microsoft have got a bee in their bonnet. I know from having worked there for 16 years, they just don't like OpenGL and WebGL. There's a whole philosophy thing going on there and some personal relationship stuff. So only now are we kind of expecting to see WebGL support in IE. And why is that important? Well, the bottom line is if you're going to write a game, you need good graphics performance. And if you don't have access to the graphics hardware, which both Apple, and I'm not going to single out Apple, a lot of the browser technologies don't give you good access to the hardware. It's too layered. And similarly, at Microsoft, even in desktop, although there's a huge promise of having the WinJava element of Windows 8, which we love, but they haven't implemented WebGL in there, so that's a big barrier for games. The third thing that I think is bad about HTML5 is it's killed Flash. You heard earlier tonight that Colin talking about, Dave, talking about the Bips game and how they chose to write it in Flash. I'm pretty sure with hindsight there might have been other technologies you would have thought of to deploy beyond just being a Facebook game, perhaps. So, I think it's bad in many ways that HTML5 has killed Flash. But what's good about it? Well, one of the good things about it is it's killed Flash. That horrible plugin for your browser, which supposedly, this is the big thing the people who love HTML5 are going to tell you, it has killed this plugin mentality and ethos. It's just not part of HTML5. So in essence, if your game runs in HTML5, you shouldn't be crashing the browser. I think the reality is maybe a little bit different, but it is a plus side for HTML5. One thing that's really interesting as a game developer, though, if you can keep your costs down, and this is something this is not a sales plug for Studio. I'm going to talk about IDEs generally in that concept. If you find something that allows you to go very cross-platform, you're not just cross-technology, you're giving yourselves the opportunity to get into different app stores. Android's a good example of it. You write an Android game, you can present your app to Barnes & Noble, you can present your app to Amazon, you can present your app to a whole bunch of different people beyond just Google. And some of those niche opportunities pay. Now, we have apps that have cost us we've done 40 games, by the way, so we published a lot of content. And we have about 10 or 20 games which every month, for no cost to us, incremental cost, other than getting through Barnes & Noble's publishing process, they send us £5 grand a month. Now, we're a bigger company now, and that means nothing to us. But if I were the two-person company that Jan was describing earlier, £5 grand a month is a lot of money. That means his partner might still be there, right? So you've got to think of these niche opportunities, and HTML5 is a great example of that. We have, I can't say how much people have paid us. I would say on average we charge £2.5 grand an app for exactly the same game we create for everybody else in HTML5 for different stores. So I've got They Need to Be Fed. Oh God, it's a successful app on iOS, so it's maybe a bad example, but we probably made £50,000-60,000 just charging fees to get They Need to Be Fed onto different HTML5 stores with exactly the same code. So there's this hunger for people to create HTML5 content and distribute it that creates opportunity. So think about how there's many a mickle makes a muckle. There's a good Scottish phrase for you. Actually, but it's serious. If you get loads of £2.5 grand for the same app and doing no work to get them across there, maybe £100 worth of work packaging it for them or whatever, that can be an interesting opportunity. Over time, I think HTML5 as a platform will be much more meaningful, particularly in one of the bets that we have for the future, and why we're not disappointed about HTML5, is we're watching smart TV very closely. And we think one of the ways that is going to be expressed for users will be HTML5 games. And there are other places, you're even seeing it popping up in console now. So for example, the Wii U's got a lovely implementation of HTML5 that they showed at GDC this year. And so, there's another opportunity area. And there is momentum. I mean, we're lucky enough now that when we go to San Francisco or wherever, we can get meetings with Google and all those sort of guys. We had some fascinating meetings with the Chrome team recently, who again are into getting a discussion going with them as HTML5. We've got the potential for an interesting relationship with Intel, based on the fact that Intel have got this huge HTML5 mantra. So, you've got to look beyond just selling your game sometimes and think, is this an opportunity for me to impress a larger company by having content that's on a platform that I don't yet believe in properly? So finally, I just kind of want to talk about how do you take advantage of HTML5 without sending everybody off on a JavaScript programming class, right? So I do come back to some of what we do and some of what other people do too. I think the first approach is to look at these kind of, there are two tools approaches. There's the IDE approach, and then there's the help you along to package your app approach. And there is technology at the very basic level. The guys with Syrah, with Construct, have got a really lovely drag and drop games development environment, limited because it's drag and drop. But it works quite well, and it does let you play around with art that you may well have that's in 2D. Your music doesn't go away, your design doesn't go away. You just have to use a more constrained but interesting and useful IDE to create your content. Related to Construct in a kind of a way is the Ludier guys, I think that's how you pronounce it, in Barcelona, who've got a kind of a library approach to allowing you to get your games wrapped in a way that makes them look like native apps on a variety of different devices. So you can take an HTML5 game and distribute it and deliver it on an iOS device or an Android device. Actually, the Construct guys use that to get their cross-platform propagation worked out. There's other guys like Game Closure, who actually were valued at $100 million by Sandhill Road, which are the venture capitalists in California. It's collectively often referred to as Sandhill Road. They took $12 million in investment. They've actually gone ways off being a multi-user JavaScript engine thing, so they've actually created an engine as well. And of course there's PhoneGap. You can look at something like GameMaker Studio, because we have in there an HTML5 native JavaScript export option, which also allows you to create native C++ based code for devices like Android and iOS as well. So to deliver in summary, to deliver your app written in HTML5 across mobile devices, I think is very difficult today, because even the packaged HTML5 performance isn't as good as getting native. But that gap is closing. We've been big fans of both Intel and Samsung supporting something called Tizen. Tizen's a new operating system platform aimed initially at mobile phones, but it's going to do cars and it's going to do TVs and everything as well. It has a native component, which we still kind of prefer. But if you look at the HTML5 performance we're seeing from that, it runs at sometimes at 75-80% of native, and Intel have got hundreds, if not thousands, of people working on creating a whole HTML5 toolchain. I mean, and not, by the way, just almost on closing to discount Unity here, there are ways that Unity can close this HTML5 gap as well. There's a thing called Inscripton, which runs from LLVM, which is the compiler that Unity use, which could allow them to create HTML5 content too if they want to. Unity is a great tool. It just doesn't do HTML5 today. So, in a nutshell, my kind of pre and post-mortem on this one is HTML5 as a platform, because I think it will eventually become one. And I do think it has opportunities for everyone today. I'm not pushing it too hard. I'm just saying that we've had an experience that's allowed us to make a bit of money doing HTML5 because people have a hunger for the content. But as a platform, it's not quite ready yet. So, I don't think I need a beer. Does anyone have any questions after that? Boy, that was a good one, wasn't it? What price is a beer? Yeah, I'm absolutely fine with that. I was kind of determined to get this one done. It's very late. So listen, are there any? Sorry, I've got a question here.
The interface with HTML5. How difficult a problem is this? If it could be touchscreen, but it might not.
No, I can't talk for how other people deal. I know how we deal with. We kind of abstract the whole interface thing in our technology, whether it's HTML5 or it's iOS. The way that we look, we don't have touch events, specific touch events. What we do is basically have mouse events. So if you want to have a multi-touch display, you can have 5 mouse events. So we kind of let me kind of share something with you very briefly. We met with Intel at Mobile World Congress in, was it February this year? And we're quite excited because it was the head of their tools division. The guy had spent like $100 million buying Havok in the past. And these days he's an HTML5 nutcase. And we sat in this meeting with about 8 people talking to us, and they were all, it kind of, if you've ever been at meetings at shows, they're noisy, it's hot, they're just not good places to have a good meeting. But I could see all the time that this guy, who was the VP of the division, it was kind of like, with hindsight, I realised he was just getting angrier and angrier with me as the meeting went on. I'm not a technology guy, right? So I thought, he's pissed with me because I can't talk about JavaScript with him, right? And we came out, and the debrief I was given was, he was really angry because we asked people to write in GameMaker language, which is a scripting language, not JavaScript. So we abstract the whole thing. You do everything in GML, as we call it. So touch events, the hardware, the programming language, we just take that all out of the equation. And for the HTML5 gurus, aficionados, fanatics, that's bad. All right, they just don't like that. They want you to write in JavaScript. They want you to have the trouble of working out how to do touch events on every different device. And that's why I think you need to look at a tool set, because I don't care if it's GameMaker. I just think you need to find tools to take you away from that complexity. Anyway, I can't see anything anyway, so you're quite all right. I'm really worried the bar might be closed. There's one here at the back.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, in the process of porting GameMaker to HTML5, you hear different stories from people about what are some of the more problematic features to support. I know I've heard of like audio in the past and things like this. In terms of parity of making that platform, when you deploy to it, similar to when you deploy to others, were there any particular areas that you found problematic or that continue to be?
There's just this huge black hole. Remember, I'm not the tech guy here, but the huge black hole is access to the graphics. And so if there's no, the easiest way to answer that is there's no WebGL, it's horrific. I mean, for games, you're going to spend an awful lot of time trying to get your game to work if there's no WebGL. So the problem with that today is on the desktop, that just rules out anybody using IE, anybody. And that's still 50% of the desktop browser market, whether you even look at new installs or old. So that's a huge problem. Oh, one more.
How many programmers and how long do you think it took from start to finish to go from GameMaker to HTML5?
I remember what we did was created an export for HTML5. So we went from GameMaker language, which is a scripting language, to creating JavaScript, pretty much mapping each GameMaker language function into JavaScript. And it took us start to finish about 4 months, and it was really one guy. It was Mike. And he's no JavaScript expert. We were lucky because our tool, our IDE, whatever you want to call it, being a scripting language, which was C-based, doesn't look that different from JavaScript. When we went through our list of thousands of functions, we just found that there was a JavaScript function for almost everything that we did. But I think if you were looking at moving some C++ or Flash is a difficulty because you're trying to work with vector graphics as well as a unique scripting language. So you don't find an easy path. And why nobody has kind of easily become a Flash developer who's now an HTML5 developer. And it's one of the kind of areas we're super interested in. We've actually got a tech demo today where we can bring vector graphics into GameMaker. And we're never going to create ActionScript. We just don't want to do it. It's just not interesting to us. But if we can bring the game design, but also the art directly in as objects into GameMaker, we think it's going to be very interesting for some Flash developers. One more.
It sounds like most of your business interest in HTML5 just now is in all these people trying to establish their own app stores being interested in content, right? That doesn't strike me something that's particularly sustainable. Do you get the impression that one of the HTML5 sort of web portals is going to win as far as it being the go-to place for people who want to play these things? Like, how would you want to get your game on sale if you weren't trying to do it through that particular mechanism? How would you make your money if you weren't convincing everybody to pay you £2.5 grand to port your game?
Well, I got to be careful because I just chose HTML5 as a stage in the life of Yo-Yo and GameMaker, which, you know, clearly the post-mortem's relevant. We haven't given up on it is the key message, really. But how would you make money? Well, what way we make money is people are basically going to pay you just to get your game on their store. I don't think you'll sell any when it gets there, but they want HTML5 content, and the going rate is anything between £2,000 and £10,000 for an app. And you know, if you look at what they made, that Jan said they made from a hotel, Diding, you know, he made £10,000 in its lifetime and was successfully promoted. That was success on iOS, and he touched it. He didn't quite get there. He just touched it. And for someone to turn around and write you a check for £3,000-4,000 just because you've got a game that kind of works is pretty interesting. You know, if you can do that 3 or 4 times across a bunch of stores, you've made more money than Jan's made from iOS.
I'm not knocking, I'm just wondering what comes next, you know?
I think what comes next is we're seeing gradually HTML5 performance increasing. I don't think, eventually you get to the point where it's as good as native. And then you've got a real, it will become the cross-platform technology. I think that's straightforward. It's more a question of when rather than if. But it's not today. All right, listen, I'm going to call it a beer halt there. All right, look. And thank you everybody for listening to me. I appreciate it.